and your evil will be yours, Montecero!
The New Adventures of Zorro, 1997 to 1998, explored. Once upon a time in old California, a hero emerged out of the shadows wearing a sombrero and fencing injustice with a Z. The classic tale of Zorro has been reiterated a few times in different formats and has garnered quite a cult following over the ages. He has been a favourite in Halloween costume parties, and if we are to cover his adventures, the 1997 version is quite a good starting point. The series ran for only 2 seasons and aired in syndication as a Saturday morning cartoon. The 1997 lore of Zorro is far more memorable for its use of science fiction and fantasy. Apart from Zorro, the other main characters in this series include the main antagonist, Captain Montecero, Zorro's manservant Bernardo, friend Isabella Torres, and a wise woman called the Grey Owl. So get your nachos ready, muchachos, as we strut into the tale of Zorro in this video. If you enjoy the content, please make sure you like the video and subscribe to our channel for more.
Always have some trick up your sleeve.
Season 1, To Catch a Fox. The episode begins with Captain Montecero's men chasing a group of men carrying blasting powder. Suddenly, the masked vigilante Zorro arrives and tries to stop Montecero's men from stealing the blasting powder, but Sergeant Garcia escapes with the barrels. Zorro ties up the rest of Montecero's men and leaves a mark on a tree as a signature. When Garcia reports the incident to Montecero, he gets furious as Zorro could be the spark of a rebellion. The next morning, Isabella, a dame of importance, meets Don Alejandro de la Vega at his estate. Don Alejandro is accompanied by Professor Fernandez as they plan on improving the agricultural environment of the area. Don Alejandro is a real humanitarian who wanted to use the blasting powder for irrigation and was more worried about the couriers than the blasting powder. However, Isabella begins to suspect Professor Hernandez as the masked vigilante, while she completely disregards the possibility that Alejandro's bookworm son, Don Diego de la Vega, is Zorro. Isabella points out that Zorro appeared just after Professor Hernandez and Diego arrived from Spain. Hernandez vehemently denies the allegation, but it's not enough to appease Miss Isabella, who takes it upon herself to venture into a prohibited area and catch Zorro red-handed. However, it's she who gets her hand tied up, as she gets caught by Montecero's men for sneaking up. As Isabella predicted, Zorro comes to the aid of a lady in distress, but the altercation leads to an accidental fire, and Isabella is forced to leave on Zorro's stead. The horse takes Isabella directly to the underground base of Zorro. The hero searches for his faithful horse, Toronado, and realizes Isabella must have ridden it. Meanwhile, a clueless Professor Hernandez is arrested as Señor Zorro. On the other hand, it's too late for Bernardo, the mute servant of Diego, to stop him from taking off his mask. Isabella finally comes to terms with the fact that Diego is Zorro, as the hero explains that being a bookworm is only a disguise. Diego asks Isabella to keep his identity secret, and she agrees on the condition that he let her join his cause. They are also the only people who learns about Zorro's secret identity in the entire series. Garcia tortures Hernandez to make him speak, but it doesn't work, and Montecero decides to use him as bait. The following morning, Diego and Isabella take a stroll in the plaza, when Garcia publicly announces Hernandez's arrest and possible execution. If Zorro doesn't turn up, Diego realizes it's a trap and makes his own plan with Isabella and Bernardo. Montecero tries to dupe Zorro by making Garcia turn up as Fernandez, but Zorro realizes the truth. Montecero's men cut the ropes of a hanging bridge to make Zorro fall to his death, but Zorro escapes and takes down Garcia with one swift blow. Zorro then engages Montecero, who tries to trap Zorro with the blasting powder. However, Zorro's partners have already rescued the barrels, and Zorro uses them as leverage to make Montecero sign Hernandez's release papers. Zorro and Montecero's fight causes a fire, and both escape the blast. When Diego is late to return to the cavern, Isabella takes her leave, but the next morning she turns up at Diego's house to see if he has arrived. Isabella and Alejandro learn that Hernandez has been released, and 2 barrels of blasting powder have been recovered. To their surprise, even Diego turns up, after pretending to have read all night.
Look out!
Sting of the Serpent God. Captain Montesero's men are at it again, looking for Zorro and trying to catch him. However, a flying serpent scares the cowardly Sergeant Garcia as he runs away with the rest. At a dinner party, with Don Alejandro, Diego, Isabella, and other influential people of the town, Montesero claims that his men are there to catch Zorro. Diego gets surprised to see Montesero's men fleeing. Later, Garcia brings the news of their failure to Montesero and shows him a rather goofy drawing of the flying serpent. Montesero recognizes the serpent as Kukulkan, the great serpent god, who supposedly guards Mayan gold in the Yucatan Mountains. Bernardo also catches Garcia, faking a story about his heroism in fighting the terrifying serpent. Tony Pope voices Sergeant Garcia, a character popularized by Henry Calvin's portrayal in the 1957 live-action show. Montesero takes Garcia to investigate the area and the closed mines, where Garcia and the others had noticed something the other night. Diego also dresses up as Zorro to follow Montesero and stop him from stealing the gold. He notices that the 3-headed snake Garcia mentioned is just a large kite. Despite a cave-in and the instability of the mines, Montesero and Garcia venture into the mines. After overcoming quite a few obstacles like boulders and rock slides, the duo encounters a Mayan guard. Montesero fights the Mayan and disarms him, but before Montesero can land a fatal blow, Zorro intervenes. He disarms Montesero, but the Mayan forces cause a cave-in to stop Montesero. As Montesero and Garcia escape to find the sacred stash of gold, Zorro makes his own exit, but comes across Montesero and Garcia. Meanwhile, Bernardo comes across the legend of Kukulkan, and Isabella realizes that Zorro could be in danger. She and Bernardo take their horses to find and help Zorro. Zorro and Montesero fight, but when Montesero's sword accidentally falls into the cart, Garcia uses it to jab at Zorro. Zorro falls, but he makes it out, only to be confronted by a group of Mayans. They are about to kill Zorro when the other Mayan tells them how Zorro saved his life. The Mayan elders tell Zorro the story of their ancestor Chicchan, the Lord of Surface, who prophesied about long-bearded men like Montesero trying to rob their gold. They also confess to Kukulkan protecting the gold. Zorro realizes that Montesero is after the gold and decides to pursue him, despite the deadly traps. Montesero acts rather quickly as he disarms the Mayan guarding the cave and takes him as a guide to overcome the obstacles. The Mayan helps. Montesero and Garcia tread carefully, while Zorro has to depend on his own wit and talent to escape getting squashed. At last, Montesero finds the gold, and at that moment, Zorro arrives. The two fight, while Montesero ignores Zorro's warning and steps on the stone statue, which makes the Kukulkan statue throw up water. The flowing stream takes Montesero and Garcia out of the territory, whereas a cave buries the Mayan gold for good. Zorro and the Mayan guard try to escape, and Isabella comes to their rescue. Night of the Tolchan. Once again, Sergeant Garcia and a group of Captain Montesero's men take to the caves, this time to steal an ancient relic, a totem. As Garcia grabs the totem from a coffin and runs away, something wakes up inside the tomb. On the other hand, Isabella rushes to Don Alejandro's house to inform him of Montesero's latest act of vandalizing burial sites for artifacts. Diego feigns disinterest and leaves, only to cape up as the mighty Zorro and leave to investigate the matter. Captain Montesero hackles with a rich peddler and sells the totem for 45 gold coins. The greed for more gold compels Montesero to learn of the other rare items in the caves and orders Sergeant Garcia to get them. As Zorro stands outside the cave, a ghostly green light from inside beckons him to enter. Zorro almost gives in, but Tornado runs away from it with Diego on his back. Zorro, or Diego, is voiced by Michael Goh, who has previously worked with Fred Wolf Films as Raphael in the final season of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1987. Zorro realizes something evil is lurking inside the cave and decides to meet his advisor, the Grey Owl. The wise Native American woman takes the form of a bear to greet the intruders. She recollects how a 10-year-old Diego entered her cave and found the medallion with the symbol of a Z, which sealed his destiny. While Zorro tells Grey Owl of the inhuman creature inside the cave, Garcia and others appear before it. The spirit of Tolchin calls to them as the men get hypnotized and enter the cave to join his Legion of the Night. Sergeant Garcia is the last one to fall under the spell, as a monstrous bat-like creature engulfs him. Meanwhile, Grey Owl insists Tolchin is an immortal warrior who was cursed as an evil shaman after exchanging his soul and kindness for power. However, the power turned him into a monster. Grey Owl asks Diego to retrieve the totem that can help either destroy or send Tolchin home. At first, Zorro returns to the cave to confront Tolchin, but Garcia and Montesero's men are in control of Tolchin and they try to capture Zorro so that Tolchin can feed off his energy. Thanks to the medallion, Tolchin is unable to do so and Zorro is spared. He rushes over to Captain Montesero's home and corners him, but he informs him that he has sold the totem. Meanwhile, Garcia and the hypnotized soldiers kidnap Isabella from her home and take her to Tolchin. Tolchin feeds off of her energy and starts controlling her. Zorro also confronts the businessman on his boat and retrieves the totem. After getting it, Zorro returns to the cave. Only to find Isabella under Tolchin's mind control, Zorro manages to escape her clasp and uses the totem to scare Tolchin. He remembers the Grey Owl's advice as he uses the totem to reflect concentrated rays of the sun. This trick works because Tolchin falls into a gorge that opens and closes involuntarily. Zorro throws the totem into the ditch and escapes the place with the damsel. The next few episodes of the series will get trickier with more Zorros, pirates, and crippled men with advanced prosthetics trying to wreck Zorro's life. The Beast Within. It's a stormy night, and Grey Owl is worried something bad is going to happen. She returns to her cave to find her young grandson, Little Squirrel, playing around with her concoctions. When Little Squirrel drops a can of magic, Grey Owl contains the spell and warns him not to play with such a staff. A little while later, a man-beast with hooves emerges from the woods and sets its target on a ranch, scaring away a bunch of bulls. The next morning, Diego and Bernardo witnessed Don Roberto seek Sergeant Garcia's help in stopping the man-beast, which had gulped one of his bulls. The cowardly Garcia refuses to help, pointing out it's not their business, but Don Roberto barges in to meet Captain Montesero. Of course, Montesero has to keep the rich happy, so he agrees to help, and orders Garcia and the others to keep an outpost at the ranch. Diego also witnesses a burly bounty hunter mistreating everyone in the market, but Bernardo stops Diego from reacting. Clearly, maintaining a facade is challenging for a rebellious soul like Bernardo. Later at his home, Diego and Isabella inquire Don Alejandro if he knows anything about the man-beast. Don Alejandro shows them a book that accounts for such mythical creatures. Isabella recalls encountering a similar creature in her childhood, but as Diego reveals, it was only he with a mask, pulling a prank on Isabella. Nevertheless, Diego notes that it's time he investigates the matter as Zorro. Back in her cave, Grey Owl discovers her grandson is gone and the cave is in shambles. She follows his footprints and realizes he is the one who has transformed into the beast. As the beast now heads towards a sheep farm, Zorro notices him, but so does Garcia and the troops. The animation appears rather stiff in the first few episodes, but it smoothens out as the series progresses. Zorro fights the troops and throws them into smelly pits. He then pursues the bleating noise and finds the beast trying to eat a sheep. The beast lets go of the sheep and charges after Zorro. However, he is able to fend for himself, and although the beast slices Zorro's sword, he tries to strangle the beast. Grandma Grey Owl comes to his rescue and lets the beast escape. She explains to Zorro that Little Squirrel has possibly played with her supplies that turned him into the beast. However, Grey Owl is running low on potions and ingredients, so she seeks time to gather the ingredients. Zorro is ready to help, and he relays everything to Isabella. As the lady insists on assisting Zorro, he makes her wear his medallion. The next morning, Garcia gets an earful from Montesero for failing and smelling horrible, while the bounty hunter prepares a trap to catch the beast. and ignores Don Roberto. Isabella tracks down the beast and is confronted by it. But as the creature notices her medallion, it becomes docile. Isabella almost convinces the beast to follow her, but obviously it can't be easy. Isabella's attempt to tame the beast fails when the bounty hunter intervenes. The bounty hunter and the beast wrestle. Meanwhile, Grey Owl finishes collecting her magical elements and creates a potion to turn the beast back into Little Squirrel. She takes the form of the owl and carries the bag of potions. On the other hand, Zorro mounts his black stallion, Tornado, and rushes out to help Isabella. Isabella notices that the beast gets trapped by the bounty hunter. However, the bounty hunter is left disappointed when Zorro arrives. Zorro captures the beast instead and fights the bounty hunter. The beast tries to strangle the bounty hunter, but Grey Owl arrives with the concoction. As Zorro sprays it on the beast, Little Squirrel turns back to himself. The disgruntled bounty hunter tries to complain, but Zorro threatens to turn him into a beast, and so he leaves.
Adios, amigo.
The Enforcer. Captain Montesero's tyranny is at its height as his minion Garcia imprisons a few poor people for not paying his high taxes. Zorro arrives to fight the injustice and lets the men escape, imprisoning Garcia and the guards instead. Montesero wakes up to the ruckus and gets furious, since the royal treasurer is supposed to arrive the next day. However, after the royal treasurer arrives, another scary and sinister-looking person enters Los Angeles. The stranger breaks through the door, defeats Montesero's men, and makes his acquaintance with the captain the stranger. Identifying himself as the Enforcer, has mechanical entrapments that help him, sort of, enforce. He makes an offer, 20,000 gold coins to get rid of Zorro. Montesero quickly agrees, which is rather suspicious. He agrees to help set up a trap to lure in Zorro. Likewise, Garcia arrests Senor Fernandez for tax evasion, although he claims to have paid it in full. The news reaches Don Alejandro and Don Nacho, who share their disgust about Captain Montesero. Isabella decides to protest, but her father, Don Nacho, reminds her that it's no place for a lady. But of course, Diego has to take matters into his own hands. He feigns tiredness and ventures out as Zorro to help out Fernandez. However, what he faces instead is the gruesome-looking Enforcer. As the duo engage in a fight, Zorro manages to escape, leaving a shred of his cape behind. Enforcer ups his rate to 50 gold coins. Clearly, he had underestimated the masked marauder as an amateur. Montesero uncannily promises to pay the sum for Zorro's head. Captain Montesero throws a fiesta in honor of the royal treasurer, and during the party, Isabella sneaks up on the duo. The series shows that Captain Montesero wants to control the entire Spanish California. Isabella witnesses Montesero bribing the royal treasurer to get a promotion. However, she gets found and abducted by the Enforcer. Montesero informs everyone at the party that Zorro has kidnapped Isabella. Enforcer takes Isabella to a Stonehenge-like formation and ties her up. Zorro turns up to rescue her and is confronted by the Enforcer. After a fierce battle, Enforcer drops rocks upon Zorro and leaves, assuming him to be dead. Isabella manages to emerge from the rubble and helps Zorro, who has survived thanks to Bernardo's device. Meanwhile, Enforcer learns that Montesero has paid off the royal treasurer, and now nothing is left for him. The Enforcer leaves and charges after the carriage to retrieve his gold. He breaks into the carriage and finds crates filled with gold, but also Zorro lurking among the loot. In this second fight, Bernardo's invention comes to Zorro's aid. He manages to secure a casket as the carriage falls off a cliff. At the same time, Enforcer is left with nothing and is unable to catch Zorro. Montesero also gets punished for losing all the gold and is asked to recover it.
Oh, Господи.
Two Zorros are better than one. Captain Montesero has his hands full with the governor of California visiting, collecting high taxes and fighting the masked vigilante Zorro. The governor is impressed with the developments Montesero has brought to town, but after traveling all the way from Santa Barbara, he needs food, lodging and rest. The governor leaves to meet his old friend Don Alejandro, while Montesero sends Garcia to clear up the road from riffraffs. When Garcia and the troop displace a poor family, Zorro comes to their rescue. Unfortunately for Montesero, the governor witnesses Zorro single-handedly defeating the police. Captain Montesero assures the governor that it's nothing serious, but the governor is disappointed to see the poor police performance Zorro leaves and then welcomes the governor to his home, along with his father, Don Alejandro. While Captain Montesero paints Zorro as a petty criminal to the governor, Don Alejandro insists he is a cunning defender of the defenseless. Nevertheless, Montesero assures the governor that his men will catch the masked marauder, while the governor gives Montesero only 2 nights. As he plans to personally judge Zorro for his crimes, Montesero doesn't waste his time, as he cooks up a plan to lure in and catch Zorro. Based on Montesero's instructions, the police put up pamphlets all across town, which say that anyone who is unable to pay their taxes by nightfall will be jailed. Captain Montesero is a typical Machiavellian villain of the 80s and 90s, and has the perfect design with a long beard that accentuates his character as the evil mastermind. However, it's truly Earl Bowen's deep voice that adds the real charm. As Zorro had guessed, trouble hits the town when Garcia and the garrison unjustly arrest a man from his home for tax evasion. The scuffle leads to a fire that catches the storage, which contains a barrel of explosives. Zorro arrives to prevent the arrest and takes on Montesero's men. After defeating them, Zorro joins the farmer in putting out the flames. He also helps in protecting the man's family from the explosion. The explosion further makes the police run away. As usual, Diego turns up late at the party thrown in honor of the governor. He whisks away Isabella before Montesero can get a chance to dance. The situation worsens for Montesero when Garcia brings news of their failure. The governor gets upset with the garrison, and Diego cunningly points out that if anyone can catch Zorro, it's Montesero. As Montesero is pitted to catch Zorro personally, he hatches another plan. He selects a member of his garrison to pretend to be Zorro and trains him. Montesero offers him a raise and promises to set him free after publicly arresting him as Zorro. The imposter kidnaps Isabella right from her home and sends a member of the garrison to inform the governor. Bernardo overhears the conversation and informs Diego as he leaves to rescue his belle. Isabella attempts to help Zorro, but mistakenly helps the imposter instead. As planned, Captain Montesero stops the imposter and arrests him right in front of the governor and Don Alejandro. Diego also arrives and asks Montesero to unmask the imposter Montesero, and Garcia pretend to be shocked when it's revealed to be a corporal. However, when the governor suggests judging the criminal and sending him to the prison in Santa Barbara, the imposter confesses that he is not Zorro, but Corporal Mendez, who agreed to work under Montesero's instructions. Of course, Montesero and Garcia deny the allegation, but Diego has other ideas. He returns as Zorro and visits the court. As Montesero incriminates Mendez, the governor sentences him to life imprisonment. However, Zorro intervenes and fights the garrison, with Mendez fighting by his side. The 2 Zorros escape through the window, and Zorro uses a batwing jet created by Bernardo to escape with Mendez. The governor leaves after losing his bet with Don Alejandro about Zorro, while Zorro lets Mendez escape the town while he stays back to protect it. Tar Pit Terror. In the dark of the night, a monster filled with tar approaches Don Alejandro's ranch and steals his cattle. The next day, Don Alejandro, Bernardo, and Diego notice the monster's footprints. Isabella arrives at the ranch and informs that Don Antonio has faced a similar loss of cattle, and Alejandro wonders if it's the legendary tar monster. Diego promised to complain to Captain Montesero, but conduct his own investigation. Diego and Isabella discover a tar pit and a bovine stuck in the tar. Diego helps the animal escape and rides back to town to report his findings. Meanwhile, the tar monster is revealed to be a cattle thief who dresses up as the monster to steal the cattle. He has other cattle thieves aiding him. As Isabella and her father ride at night, they encounter the beast, but Zorro comes to their aid. To help their mate escape, the thieves release the stolen cattle to cause a stampede. Zorro asks Tornado to escape with Isabella and her dad, while Zorro makes his own escape. He also obtains a tar monster glove disguise as evidence to prove it's a person dressing up as the monster. However, there is a real monster lurking in the mountains. Interestingly, Playmates Toys released Zorro figurines that coincide with the show, but the main villain for the toy line was Captain Ramon instead of Captain Montesero. However, the 2 works are very similar. The ranch owners of the town start getting restless and complain to Captain Montesero, who tries to blow it up as a ghost tale. The ranchers then decide to take it upon themselves to catch the monster. As the ranchers, including Diego, leave Montesero's office, he notices the cattle thief head inside the office and leave a tar print on the floorboard. It appears the cattle thieves have made a deal with Montesero to keep a blind eye to their affairs. He leaves Montesero a bag of gold coins as a bribe. Back in his lair, Zorro prepares to go on his own way to solve the matter, while Isabella volunteers to help. She refuses to listen to Zorro and leaves with a sword. Isabella encounters the tar monster and finds their truth, but also gets herself trapped in the tar pit. She receives unexpected help from the real monster, who scares away the cattle thieves and saves Isabella from the pit. As the monster leaves, Isabella follows it back to its cave and attends to its wounds. Meanwhile, the cattle thieves arrive at Montesero's station and force him to help them get rid of the real monster. They also threaten to reveal Montesero's involvement in the scam. All the men, including the ranchers, thieves, and the garrison, head over to the mountains to catch the monster. Isabella tries to stop them and explain that the real monster is not the culprit, but the cattle rustlers and Montesero, but nobody is ready to listen to her pleas. Finally, Zorro arrives to help the duo and defends the poor beast against the garrison. When Isabella reveals that the real culprits they trying to take her hostage and escape, but the monster attacks them, and Zorro rescues Isabella. Montesero also tries to get rid of Zorro by setting the tar pit on fire. However, Zorro and the monster escape before the cave blows up. A king's ransom. A package gets delivered to Don Alejandro de la Vega, and turns out it's a gift from the King of Spain. The gift is revealed to be a life-size statue of the King. Alejandro claims he once did a big favor to the king. At night, the front of the statue breaks off, and a man in a leather scarecrow mask gets out from inside the statue. He ties up Bernardo and even his mouth. The man then gets inside the house, checks up on Diego, and then kidnaps Alejandro. Diego finds that his father is gone and dresses up as Zorro to follow the kidnapper. Although Zorro manages to corner the kidnapper, the cart carrying Don Alejandro rolls down the mountain road. As Zorro charges after it, Captain Montesero's garrison notices and follows Zorro. This feels like the end of Don Alejandro, but the kidnapper saves him at the last moment. The kidnapper escapes with his hostage, while Zorro escapes the garrison with a little bit of help from Tornado. The next day, a little boy brings a ransom note for Diego from the Leatherface man. The kidnapper demands a king's ransom worth 100,000 pesos in exchange for Don Alejandro. However, the ransom note reminded Zorro of the time when his father worked for the Spanish king. As Diego dives into the story, we get a flashback of how, one evening, a group of renegade Spanish soldiers led by Miguel Villanueva attacked the king. Luckily, a younger Don Alejandro was passing by, and he protected the king, but a fire accidentally burned Miguel's face, and he was imprisoned for a lifetime. Isabella deduces that Miguel must have escaped prison and smuggled himself inside the statue, while Diego notes the map sent by Miguel to find his father. Meanwhile, Don Alejandro finally realizes that the kidnapper is Miguel Villanueva, who wants his revenge. Miguel even reveals his burned face to Alejandro and claims he will ensure that Alejandro will spend 30 years rotting in jail. At the same time, the little messenger boy meets his friends in a candy shop as he tells the shopkeeper about the ransom letter. Garcia eavesdrops. He takes the boy to Captain Montesero, who decides to milk the situation. Montesero dresses some members of his garrison as kidnappers. The imposters rob Don Diego de la Vega, who pretends to be a weak and cowardly man. However, Diego notices the polished, military-cut boots on the men and realizes they were sent by Montesero. Captain Montesero pretends to defeat them and sends his men to recover the stolen ransom, but cleverly points out that they might be unable to recover it. In case you didn't get it, Montesero plans on taking the 100,000 pesos for himself. Montesero further implores that he will use a fake Diego to appear before the kidnapper. Diego takes up the offer as he needs the break to dress up as Zorro. Diego also gives his jacket to the captain to keep up the facade. When Montesero and his men enter Miguel's den, Alejandro is unable to recognize his men, while Miguel realizes that the captain has come to catch him. Miguel stops the garrison and tries to escape, but Zorro fights Miguel. Miguel is also able to corner Montesero and Zorro. However, Zorro has found out that staying in a dark cell has made Miguel blind to light, and he uses a light stick to not only stop Miguel, but also free Alejandro from his cell. Zorro escapes and returns home just before Alejandro makes it back. He gives all the credit to Zorro for his rescue. Captain Montesero also celebrates his victory after arresting Miguel and getting his hands on the 100,000 pesos. But Zorro has the last laugh when he steals it back. The Pirates of San Pedro. A bunch of pirates lands in El Pueblo in search of Spanish treasure, which is apparently stashed in a nearby land. The pirate captain follows the map that was drawn by his father and finds a well where the treasure should be. He asks his men to dig through, but they are able to recover nothing. The pirates attack the neighboring house of Don Francisco, hoping that he had kept the loot for himself. But Francisco informs them that he bought the land from someone who has gone back to Spain. The next day, Isabella packs up several old belongings of Diego to donate them to the mission. When they learn about the pirate attack at Don Francisco, when Don Francisco informs Captain Montesero, he takes the matter into his own hands, hoping to win the jackpot. Meanwhile, in a local bar, one of the pirates notices a farmer paying with a rare golden coin. As the pirate follows the farmer, Bernardo notices them. He passes the information to Zorro, who leaves to investigate the matter. The pirates ambush the farmer, but are unable to find anything. Zorro comes to the farmer's help, while Garcia and the garrison also turn up to join the fight. Zorro gets rid of both and finds another golden coin, while the pirates are pretty out of depth as one of them gets arrested by the police. The pirates are one of the few recurring additional villains that make a comeback in Season 2, but we will get to that later. Montesero makes a deal with the pirate and asks him to tell his captain that Montesero is ready to help. If Captain Espera is prepared to split the treasure, Montesero sends Garcia to inquire, and he learns from the farmer that the doubloon was given to him by Padre Escobar from the mission. Montesero meets Espera and directs him towards the mission, as he cannot be associated with something as vile as piracy. Of course, Espera doesn't plan on sharing his treasure, but he plays along. Meanwhile, Zorro finds out about the ship that had sunk 20 years ago and realizes that the treasure was stashed by Espera's father, Carlos Espera. As Zorro leaves to find the pirate ship, he finds one of the pirates waiting for him. Clearly, Espera did not get a memo on Zorro, for he wouldn't have left the lousiest one to stop him. Zorro easily subdues the pirate and learns where the others went. At the mission, Padre Escobar gives the doubloons to the poor when the pirates storm in and demand the treasure. The Padre reveals that it was donated by Don Enrique de la Rey when he found the treasure while digging a well years ago. The pirates take the treasure and the Padre as hostages, while tying up the rest in the cellar. Espera gives a ring to Isabella before flooding the cellar. When Zorro arrives, Isabella flicks the ring to signal him, and he rescues the captives. The pirates dupe Montesero and leave him tied to a tree, while Isabella and Zorro take a boat to secretly get on the pirate ship. Garcia finds Montesero, and he takes the police to raid the ship. But as Zorro attempts to take the treasure, the villains decide to fight together once again. Isabella also joins in and rescues the Padre, while Bernardo shoots a harpoon at the ship and Zorro uses it as a zip line to reach the beach. However, he accidentally drops the treasure chest into the sea and the pirates are arrested by Montesero. Later, Zorro turns up at the mission with the treasure chest, revealing he had a string attached to it and that he had intentionally thrown it in the ocean so that the pirates won't bother the mission ever again. The Anti-Zorro. The episode begins with Sergeant Garcia and his men approaching an old and blind Native American man who calls himself the White Eye Garcia, is here to claim the land for a certain Don Ricardo, who is supposed to set up his ranch. But White Eye proclaims himself to be the guardian of the sacred land and aims to protect it. When Garcia and his men try to hurt White Eye, Zorro arrives to help him. However, White Eye uses his magic to summon an albino bull that charges after the garrison and even knocks into Garcia's butt. Zorro assumes the albino bull is an illusion, but White Eye proves that it can cause physical damage. The next day, Don Ricardo arrives, but Garcia comes rushing in with the news of their failure. Don Ricardo orders Captain Montesero to solve the situation as soon as possible and threatens to inform the governor. Meanwhile, Don Alejandro tells his son about the rotten Don Ricardo. On the other hand, Captain Montesero conjures a plan to get rid of Zorro with the help of the shaman. As Garcia manages to capture White Eye and bring him to prison, Montesero offers to let him go if he can conjure the anti-Zorro. In the previous Zorro continuities, the villain was named Captain Enrique Sanchez de Monasterio. The Latin American dub thus kept the name as Captain Monasterios, while the European Spanish dub of the series has changed it to Captain Montesero. Zorro also learns about White Eye's arrest and breaks into the prison to rescue him. However, the anti-Zorro attacks Zorro and tries to get his medallion. White Eye warns Zorro that if anti-Zorro touches the medallion, his negative energy will combine with Zorro's positive energy and churn a storm. Zorro manages to escape, but Captain Montesero refuses to free White Eye. Don Alejandro, Isabella and Diego find out that the river has dried out and Don Ricardo is responsible. Ricardo has built a dam and now claims to own a private lake. Of course, he bribes Montesero, but Alejandro arrives to protest. Later, everyone meets up for dinner at Alejandro's estate to discuss the matter, but anti-Zorro crashes it. He claims to have come to fight Zorro, who is one of the people at the dinner party. Isabella jokes that it could be her, while Montesero gets suspicious. Back in his cell, White Eye realizes that anti-Zorro is about to oust Zorro and uses a spell to distract anti-Zorro. The ghostly Zorro challenges the real Zorro to turn up at the sacred land of the Indians for their ultimate fight, and Montesero claims anyone who is missing that day would most evidently be Zorro. The forces Diego, Isabella and Bernardo to come up with a plan. Isabella dresses up as Zorro and wears a mask with his face to disguise herself as she turns up at the spot along with Bernardo. In the meantime, Zorro rescues White Eye from the prison. He finally arrives to confront anti-Zorro, and with Bernardo's invention, as well as a little bit of White Eye's magic, he defeats anti-Zorro. However, Ricardo cancels the contract and leaves the place, while Isabella turns up moments later, teasing Montesero for assuming her to be Zorro.
We're almost there.
Почти добрались.
Valley of the Man-Beast. During an unusual tiff with Sergeant Garcia and the police, Zorro encounters a sudden earthquake. Little Squirrel was collecting fruits nearby when the tremors hit, and he lost his amulet as he fell down. Little Squirrel finds himself in a hidden cave and befriends a very scared Sasquatch. Zorro finds Little Squirrel's amulet, and then the boy. Just as the Sasquatch hides behind a cliff, when Zorro brings Little Squirrel back to his grandmother, the Grey Owl, she tells them about the legend of the Beastmen. Apparently, the man-beasts are dangerous giants, and although they are not evil, they spell doom. You can obviously make out that the Sasquatch is a man-beast baby and is going to stir up some trouble. Speaking of trouble, Little Squirrel encounters Carlos Denimo's family circus. Carlos Denmos is an escape artist and a ventriloquist. His eldest son, Alberto, is a juggler and knife thrower, while his younger son, Jay, is an acrobat. The youngest, a daughter, Ursula, is extremely strong. Ursula is won over by the adorable Little Squirrel, but Carlos doesn't want anyone to watch the show for free. As Carlos asks Little Squirrel to get lost, he thinks up a way to let him stay. He tells them about the Sasquatch and takes them to the beast Little Squirrel, convinces the Sasquatch to get inside Carlos's cage. Little Squirrel hopes to work with the circus to help it draw a large audience, unaware that he has just invited the man-beast. However, their path is blocked by Diego and Isabella. Diego asks Isabella to keep the family circus from leaving and goes to consult his father. However, Carlos dupes Isabella and gets away. Diego returns to his home and consults his father, who confirms the legend of the man-beast. He even shows Diego the mold of a man-beast's footprint. Diego realizes there is no time to lose, as the father man-beast would definitely come looking for his pup. There was a tie-in comic published by Topps Comics based on this show, but it received far less popularity than the series itself. Moving on, Carlos faces another obstacle from Montesero, who wants a 50% cut in the profits. Soon enough, Zorro faces the man-beast, which has left its valley in search of the pup. Zorro saves Isabella from the man-beast and leaves for the circus. Meanwhile, Carlos earns quite a profit and gives half to Montesero, while Little Squirrel rues his choices. As Zorro turns up at the circus, Carlos and his sons fight him. Carlos even entraps Zorro in a cage, which makes Montesero reward him. By this time, the man-beast reaches the town and starts rampaging. As it approaches to crush Zorro, he manages to escape, while Carlos leaves with his family and the baby Sasquatch. As Zorro also goes after the caravan, Montesero asks his men to follow him and stop Zorro from returning. The beast Little Squirrel also manages to get on the caravan and tries to free the Sasquatch, but Ursula stops him and ties him up. Eventually, Zorro catches up to them and flings Carlos's sons from the caravan. Ursula now switches sides and frees Little Squirrel, as she also lets Zorro take the caravan with the pup to the Man-Beast Valley. When Garcia and men stop Zorro, the Man-Beast arrives, and while all flee, Garcia faints. Zorro lets the caravan head into the valley, as he and Little Squirrel stay behind. As the Man-Beast and his pup reunite, Zorro and Bernardo close the entrance to the valley for good. The Iron Man. In this episode, Captain Montesero meets Lieutenant Correa as he brings an iron shipment to build a fort for General Ortega. Lieutenant Correa informs Montesero that a similar shipment was stolen previously from another captain's nose, and that this time, Montesero's job is on the line. However, disaster still strikes as a bunch of robbers in complete iron armor attack and steal the shipment. Zorro appears and tries to stop them, but the Iron Men still escape with the shipment carriages, thanks to Garcia and the garrison trying to stop him. It appears the series takes place between 1812 and 1821, which could place it during the Napoleonic Wars or in post-war chaos. Later, Diego, Isabella and Bernardo encounter Lieutenant Correa and Captain Montesero at the library. Correa is revealed to be Diego's engineering professor at the University of Madrid, which again did not exist before 1943. Correa informs that he was appointed to build the North Fortress. However, when Diego mentions that Bernardo is far better in mechanical engineering, a man overhears them and leaves hurriedly. As one might have suspected, the man is one of the bandits who stole the iron shipment, and he returns to their hideout, where a group of men led by a man known as the Professor awaits. The Professor asks the man to kidnap Bernardo. The bandits again gear up in iron costumes and crash the De La Vega dinner party, which they are hosting in honor of Correa. Diego sneaks out and comes back as Zorro to fight, but with all the distractions, he fails to notice that Bernardo is kidnapped. Later, Diego pretends to be scared and hides behind a bush when he notices that Bernardo is missing. Back at the hideout, Bernardo refuses to do the Professor's bidding, but he threatens to destroy the De La Vegas, forcing Bernardo to act. When the bandits steal supplies again, Zorro follows them in secret. He sneaks in and finds Bernardo. However, as the duo tries to escape, they are caught by the bandits and their leader, the Professor. The Professor reveals himself to be Lieutenant Montecruz, the first engineer to General Ortega, but he seemed to have become vengeful as the general rejected his design for the fortress and selected Correa. So it's basically another revenge story where Montecruz wants to destroy the fortress. Montecruz further reveals the war machine he has built and gets inside it as he charges after the fortress. Bernardo and Zorro also leave, as Isabella is on the way to the fortress. Meanwhile, General Ortega visits the fortress and is impressed when Montecruz attacks Zorro, rescues Isabella, and gets inside the fortress to save Lieutenant Correa. Montecruz reveals it's him inside the robot and that he wants revenge, but Zorro still defeats him with the help of Bernardo's inventions. However, Montesero and Correa have to wash their hands of their promotions. Season 2. The Samurai and the Sorcerer. The episode opens on a stormy sea as a ship drowns and a woman desperately calls for someone named Toshiro. When Captain Montesero and his men find the woman, she is in an unconscious state and is wearing an amulet. Montesero and Garcia try to grab the amulet, but it burns their hand, so they decide to take the woman away instead. Zorro watches everything and decides to undertake his own investigation. When the woman wakes up, she identifies herself as a Japanese woman, and as Lady Akiko Montesero warns her of Zorro and demands the amulet for safekeeping, but she refuses, as it's a powerful family heirloom. Montesero orders his men to seize the woman. However, Akiko uses the amulet's power to throw them off and explains that only the wearer can remove it. At last, Montesero locks up Akiko in the room with guards. Meanwhile, Zorro encounters a samurai looking for Akiko. As Zorro refuses to answer, the samurai attacks him. The samurai's katana even slices through Zorro's sword, making him realize it's time to flee and fight the next day. This is, however, realistically impossible, as a rapier is supposed to be bouncy and cannot be sliced, while a katana might still be cut with a rapier blade. Anyway, Zorro escapes, and later, as Diego, he meets Isabella, who promises to use her womanly charms in gathering information. She serves Sergeant Garcia baked goods to learn about Akiko. On the other hand, Toshiro the samurai gets caught by Montesero's men. However, he escapes, while Zorro also sneaks in and helps Akiko. They flee, and Akiko tells him why she left her homeland. Akiko explains that she was a lady in the shogun's court and engaged to marry a samurai called Toshiro. However, an evil sorcerer named Shinji arrived at the palace with a book of spells and threatened to turn Toshiro into a beetle and crush him if Akiko didn't hand over the amulet. Akiko claims that she left to protect Toshiro, but he left with her to protect her instead. However, it's rather funny when the supposedly learned Diego, aka Zorro, mistakes Toshiro as the evil sorcerer. Zorro tries to prevent Toshiro from meeting Akiko, but she clarifies it's her fiancé and even stops the two men from quarreling. Meanwhile, Shinji arrives on the shore and sets forth to find Akiko. He turns up at the station, disguised as a Japanese traveler. When Montesero shoves him, Shinji reveals his true self and conjures a tornado. Garcia points Shinji towards Zorro, and Shinji's magical cloud follows them. Shinji finally confronts the trio and uses his magic to suspend Zorro and Toshiro in the air. Akiko attempts to throw the amulet into the sea, but Shinji catches it. Shinji wears the amulet and transforms into a monster, while Toshiro bravely fights him. At last, Zorro jumps on the monster's back and wears the amulet before cutting it off. Akiko takes back the amulet and puts it on. Zorro also reveals that he has stolen the Book of Spells, and Akiko burns it. With no other spells known, Shinji vanishes, while Toshiro and Zorro reconcile. As the couple sets out for their homeland, Isabella asks Diego how he stole the book, and he proves he is just a common thief. The Poison Pen. The story begins with Reynaldo Hernandez, a famous writer visiting the De La Vegas at their hacienda. Don Alejandro also introduces him to Isabella, who is a huge fan of Don Hernandez's The Flying Crow novels. However, something is up, as he appears nervous and claims to have quit writing the novels. Isabella asks if she can visit him for guidance in writing her stories, but he refuses. All this while a raven follows him, and Reynaldo leaves hurriedly. He returns to an old castle, which he has bought for his retirement. But instead of resting, Reynaldo starts writing, as if he is under some supernatural control. Meanwhile, the news of his arrival reaches Captain Montesero, and he decides to pay the famous writer a visit. As Reynaldo feverishly writes his story, it becomes reality. The raven travels to Ignacio Torres's ranch and attacks him and another man. Reynaldo tries to stop writing, but the pen compels him. The raven turns into a humanoid crow, and suddenly Zorro appears to protect the innocent. As Reynaldo is forced to write, the raven subdues Zorro and ties him to a wooden plank that's about to be cut. He is saved at the last moment when Captain Montesero's sudden arrival distracts Reynaldo. The bird suddenly loses all magic and flies away. Reynaldo also pushes Montesero away and resumes his writing. As Zorro returns to his lair and removes his mask, the bird notices it and reports it back to Reynaldo. The raven monster, known as Corvus Corks, threatens Reynaldo to write what he saw and to reveal that Zorro is Diego. It's revealed that Reynaldo writes with a quill made from the raven's tail feather. This story is most evidently a homage to Edgar Allan Poe's poem The Raven, and at the end of it, Reynaldo owns a pet raven called Edgar to highlight it. The next day, Isabella makes a sudden visit, and the bird forces Reynaldo to write. The raven takes its monstrous form and attacks Isabella. As Isabella tries to escape, she gets trapped on a large perch. The raven explains that when Reynaldo was aspiring to be a writer, all his manuscripts were initially rejected by publishers. However, the devil appeared and gave him the magical quill, which enabled Reynaldo to be successful. It was too late until Hernandez realized his mistake. Now, before we move on, this season also carries some of the best stories of the entire series, so if you have stayed with us for so long, you are the lucky one. To give you a glimpse, things get tight when a British detective with an eye for detail and even sharper intuition tries to unmask Zorro. There is also a hunter on the loose seeking his head, and keeping his secret identity a secret from his father might be the deadliest challenge Diego has to face. Now, coming back to the monstrous raven, it forces Reynaldo to write letters, one to Captain Montesero, inviting him to catch Zorro and reveal his real identity, and another to Diego, asking him to rescue Isabella. So when Zorro enters the castle and finds Isabella, he finds Montesero's garrison after him. Zorro jumps onto the perch, but finds his mechanical wings are not working. The monstrous raven also appears, and promises to be a greater adversary to Montesero after getting rid of Zorro. However, Isabella realizes what she must do. With Zorro's help, she escapes and approaches the writer. Reynaldo gives in and gives her the quill, with which Isabella writes the story's conclusion, enabling Zorro to defeat the monster. Reynaldo also destroys the quill, and the demon vanishes. Sometime after, Reynaldo reads aloud the manuscript of his latest book to Alejandro, Isabella, and Diego. Alejandro doesn't feel making Diego Zorro would be profitable, and Reynaldo agrees to remove it while Edgar appears and sits on Reynaldo's shoulder. Vision of Darkness. When Don Alejandro gets surrounded by a group of bandits, Zorro immediately arrives to save him, but Garcia and the garrison notice him. Zorro defeats the bandits, and they run away, but the fight with the garrison makes his mask momentarily fall off. Zorro wears the mask before anyone can see his face and escapes. When he returns to the hideout, he tells Bernardo and Isabella about quitting being Zorro. However, Isabella and Bernardo think it's not a good idea and ask Diego to reveal his truth to his father. Diego worries that if his identity is out, it will bring shame to the De La Vega name and harm his father. Diego also fails to confess to his father and decides to consult the Grey Owl. The Grey Owl proceeds to show him what his future could look like and casts a spell on the water, but as Zorro touches the water to remove the fog, he gets transported without realizing it. It seems he has somehow time-traveled, as Garcia is now the captain and crueler than Montesero. Garcia has taken over Alejandro's hacienda and captures Zorro, but Bernardo is still there and is shocked to see him. Speaking of time travel, the series hasn't aged well, despite its promising story and animation. There is hardly any home media, and only the first 10 episodes of Season 1 are on VHS, 6 of which were reissued on DVD. Moving on, Bernardo helps Zorro escape and informs him that his father is hiding in the mountains. After his son had been missing for 5 years, Bernardo has stayed behind to spy on Garcia, but unfortunately, he also has to make inventions and weapons for Garcia. Bernardo shows Zorro the newspapers, which reveal that Montesero has become the governor, and now, with another promotion, he is traveling to Spain as the official representative of California. Zorro dresses up as Diego and visits Igancio Torres, where he learns that Isabella has become a renegade and joined Alejandro. As Diego visits the market, he gets arrested by the garrison for not carrying papers according to Garcia's laws. After Diego is imprisoned, Garcia suspects that he is Zorro. Nevertheless, he intends to use Diego as bait to lure out Alejandro and try them both for treason. Garcia's plan works as news reaches Alejandro, and he takes his group of rebels, including Isabella, to free Diego. Garcia and the garrison surround them, but the group manages to escape, along with Diego. As they reach the hideout, Alejandro shares his delight at having his son back and reveals that he knows Diego is Zorro. Isabella is still upset at him for abandoning them, to which Diego explains his time travel. Diego leaves to find Grey Owl to prove his story, but cannot find her. Instead, the garrison attacks the rebels. As the rebels fight, Bernardo brings his newest invention to aid them, but when Zorro tries to use it, he is thrown back, and Grey Owl emerges from the fumes. It appears Zorro is back in the present and has learnt the lesson that his father will always accept him. As Zorro leaves, He asks if it was reality or just his imagination, to which Grey Owl asks if there is any difference. The case of the masked marauder. The British detective Oliver Tipton has received a message from Captain Montesero about missing crops. As he decides to travel to California for the investigation, his colleagues set a wager for him to unmask the masked marauder Zorro. Back in El Pueblo, the police, as well as Zorro, witness a large golden ball of light appearing over the grain field. The police run away, while the farmer tries to defend his farm. Zorro takes him away from harm, but the golden ball of light steals the crops and vanishes into the air. The event puzzles even the great Zorro. Soon Oliver Tipton arrives and inquires about the crop circles and Zorro. Tipton also meets the ranchers and asks them questions, especially Isabella and Diego, who claim not to have seen Zorro face to face. Later, as Zorro goes to investigate the case, Tipton follows him. The character of Oliver Tipton is probably a reference to the great fictional Sherlock Holmes. It appears the Californian ranchers are aware of him and his cases. Tipton notices how Zorro fights the silver giant, appearing out of the golden ball of light, and attempts to stop it. Although Zorro fails and the light vanishes, he picks up some wet mud to investigate. Zorro further dupes Tipton from catching him, leaving Tipton impressed. On the other hand, the golden ball of light and the giant turn out to be an illusion created by British thieves planning something big. Meanwhile, Zorro, Bernardo, and Isabella figure out that the thieves are stealing grain to make alcohol. The next day, Isabella visits Tipton to gauge how much he has learned. She even tries to misdirect him about Zorro and comments that he could be someone from the garrison, but as Tipton observes, she is too obvious. Tipton watches Isabella and Diego converse. Tipton's fine lip-reading skills help him understand what they are talking about. Diego has found out who is buying yeast and guesses it would be the grain thieves. Tipton visits Senor Isidro, who has supposedly bought the yeast. Under the guise of a baking detective, Tipton warns him that the yeast could make Isidro very ill, to which he informs that he bought it for someone else, who paid him, but didn't reveal his name. As Tipton notices, Zorro is approaching the house. He asks Isidro to hide and disguises himself to misdirect Zorro. Tipton follows the trail of mud left by the buyers and finally reaches the thieves' hideout. However, he is caught, and it's revealed that a certain British Admiral Wexler is stealing the grains to make alcohol, which he will use as a fuel for an underwater ship that he has built based on Leonardo da Vinci's design. This series is rather unique in terms of how steampunk, science, and engineering, as well as fantasy, are entwined with the story, making it more palatable for viewers of all ages. Admiral Wexler is a jilted soldier, since England refused to give him the ship needed to defeat the Yankees in 1812. However, Admiral Wexler intends to fulfill his dreams and attack the capital of the United States. With his submarine, Oliver Tipton reveals that the disappearing crop investigation is just a cover, as Admiral Haven has sent him to arrest Wexler. This seems difficult, as Wexler takes Tipton captive. When Wexler sends his men to get fresh provisions for their travel, Tipton writes down everything in his diary and puts it in the carriage. The shopkeeper gets the diary, and later Bernardo delivers it to Zorro. In the final act of the story, Zorro takes a boat to stop the underwater ship, but Montesero's men try to catch him. Zorro manages to get inside the ship and meets Tipton, who has managed to escape his cell. The duo blows up the submarine and escapes. Admiral Wexler and his men get caught by Montesero, while Tipton and Zorro come out hand in hand. Tipton notes that he will lose the wager, but hints at knowing the true identity of Zorro.
Завтра мы опять приедем, так что встречайте нас.
Return of the Conquistadors. The story starts off with Diego and Bernardo leaving for a village to find historical items of the Conquistadors. However, this is only a cover, as he is leaving to answer the call for help sent by Father Antonio. Isabella insists on joining them, but Diego rejects the offer as it is too dangerous for her. Of course, she intends to follow them. According to Father Antonio's letter addressed directly to Zorro, his village is taken over by a bunch of ferocious bandits. It appears everyone in the quaint village is afraid of the bandits who robbed the villagers of their clothes, food, cattle, earnings, and almost everything. After the bandits leave, Diego and Bernardo arrive and look for Father Antonio in the church, but a spy informs the bandits. Diego catches Father Antonio praying to God and waiting for Zorro. Father Antonio explains that the village is terrorized by a group of 10 bandits led by Pancho Vidoa. However, the peaceful villagers are too afraid and, for lack of better words, cowardly to protest Pancho Vidoa, and his bandits soon arrive and try to rob Diego's belongings. One of the bandits even finds his Zorro costume, but Isabella makes a daring entry and saves Zorro's identity from being revealed. Diego pretends to make a cowardly escape by clinging to the cart's horses, but makes a jump over the cliff. He returns dressed as Zorro and fights Pancho, but finds himself too outmatched. Zorro, Isabella and Bernardo escape for the time being and return later when the bandits are gone. They tell Father Antonio that they need the villagers' help to get rid of the bandits, and Zorro finds a way to convince them. Although there are several gaping differences in the plot, this series was mainly produced to coincide with the upcoming live-action The Mask of Zorro, 1998, featuring Antonio Banderas, Anthony Hopkins and Catherine Zeta-Jones. Interestingly, in the movie, Anthony Hopkins plays the original and older Zorro, or Diego de la Vega. One by one, Isabella, Bernardo and Zorro approach a few village folks. Isabella speaks with an old woman, whose son Ernesto has become a spy for the bandits, while Bernardo helps a blacksmith with a prosthetic for his amputated arm. Zorro also saves a family's dinner from being robbed and asks the farmer to fight. These people join the fight, and Zorro tries to train them. Isabella and Bernardo go to the blacksmith's shop to create real weapons, but they get captured by the bandits. Pancho forces Isabella to dine with them, but later at night, Isabella tries to convince Ernesto to switch sides. Ernesto still betrays her, and Pancho orders his men to take Isabella and Bernardo to a Mayan pyramid infested with vicious snakes. Back in the village, the villagers lose as they try to fight with random items. As the entire village hides in the church, they blame the priest and Zorro for bringing in the bandits' wrath. However, Ernesto comes around and helps Isabella and Bernardo escape. He shows them a hidden stash of weapons and armor, which they take back to the villagers. Now, fully equipped, the villagers fight the bandits alongside Zorro and send the bandits packing the hunter. As the title suggests, this story is about Hunter Don Domingo de la Hoya. Well, after several daring hunting expeditions, Don Domingo is bored and wants some excitement in life. His servant Kamal brings the newspaper, and a particular piece on Zorro, who is seemingly impossible to catch, intrigues the hunter. He takes up the challenge and visits Captain Montesero and offers to hunt down Zorro. Montesero takes it upon himself and claims to have the noose tight around Zorro and shows Domingo a map of Zorro's footprint. Domingo mocks and even angers Montesero before he takes the map and points out that Montesero needs him to catch the masked marauder. Domingo goes on a trail to the place where Zorro was last spotted and examines the Z mark as well as the things his sword has cut through. With the help of his red Indian guide, Domingo even sets up a trap where a rampage of sheep topples a shepherd from the cliff. Zorro appears after hearing the shepherd's cry for help, but the Indian stops Zorro from rescuing the guy. Zorro fights on double font as he fights with Domingo and the Indian who attacks from behind. However, Zorro is still able to discuss his acrobatic skills and intelligence as he rescues the shepherd and leaves with him. Later, Diego tells about his encounter to Isabella and Tornado. Diego consults his father's book on hunting and finds the name of Domingo. He soon catches Domingo traveling to set up more traps. Diego decides to leave for the time being and asks Bernardo to lie about attending a scientific symposium while he dresses up as Zorro and leaves Domingo notices him, and with the help of the Indian tracker, he follows the trail. Domingo's character is made to be a mix of Craven and DC's Catman. Domingo and the Indian trap Zorro in a ring of fire, hoping he wouldn't be able to escape. But Zorro proves resourceful. Zorro claims to be aware of Domingo's brutal hunting way and escaped the chains by latching onto Domingo's cart. Zorro calls for the Grey Owl and tells her about the Indian boy named Speedy Foot. Grey Owl visits Speedy and warns him not to help Domingo in catching someone like Zorro, who fights injustice. As Speedy Foot refuses to catch Zorro, Domingo fires him from his post. Grey Owl asks Speedy to leave, but Domingo ties her up and drops her on a raft. Zorro again fends off against a few of Domingo's attacks, but the hunter is relentless. Zorro further notices that the grey owl is in danger, and so he cuts off the reins of the horses and turns the cart into a boat as he goes after the cart. Domingo also uses his own foldable boat to pursue them. Domingo and Zorro again spar with each other, but Zorro manages to escape and rescue Grey Owl, while Domingo falls through the waterfall. However, Domingo makes a last try at catching Zorro, but Grey Owl appears as a grizzly bear and threatens Domingo. The hunter runs away, but promises to catch Zorro one day.
Бочку своим штопором.
The raiding party. It's the governor's birthday, and he has invited the rich and influential to travel on a cruise. Captain Montesero also joins them as an honoured guest, while Sergeant Garcia and the garrison join for security measures. On board the ship, Montesero wants a chance to dance with Isabella and cuts through Diego and Isabella's dance. We are not sure if Montesero likes Isabella, but there is definitely a ship tease with Diego and Isabella. The revelry is cut short when the fog intensifies and a pirate ship attacks them. It's none other than Captain Esparra and his pirates who want revenge and their old treasure. The garrison and some of the people, like Alejandro, try to fight to no avail. Esparra demands to know where Zorro is, to which Alejandro informs that they don't know about his real identity. Esparra decides to fund his search for the vigilante and demands all the valuables as well as the governor's gifts. Diego finds himself trapped as he is unable to sneak away and change when the pirates demand his case full of clothes and a Zorro costume. He grabs the case and pretends to trip and fall off the ship. Alejandro breaks down, thinking he lost his son. Meanwhile, Diego sneaks back onto the ship and changes into Zorro. He takes down one of the pirates and gets on deck. Just as Esparra is going to feed Captain Montesero to the sharks, Zorro fights the pirates, and some of the passengers also come across swords that help them fight. But when Alejandro almost falls off the ledge, Zorro saves him. However, they are now surrounded and outnumbered by the pirates. On the other hand, Montesero and Garcia escape the ships and head on to the nearby island. They meet up with Colonel Diaz and inform him about the hijacking situation. Back on the ship, Esparra proceeds to unmask Zorro, but the sudden attack from Colonel Diaz's ship forces him to take different actions. Zorro jumps off the ship, but gets stuck on the anchor. Esparra orders his men to drown Zorro, but Bernardo slides off the keys and helps Zorro get free. Meanwhile, Esparra orders his men to dress up the hostages as pirates and flies the Jolly Roger flag before leaving with their own ship. The garrison on the fort fires at the hostage ship, but Zorro comes up and unties Alejandro, who helps the others get free. However, the garrison on board attacks him, but Zorro escapes and lands on the pirate ship. He fights the pirates and fires the cannon, bringing the ship to the attention of the fort. As the fort attacks and destroys the pirate ship, Zorro brings the ship to shore to get the pirates sent back to prison. Later, he turns up as Diego and reunites with his grieving dad. The four horsemen, Enforcer, and his 3 horsemen invade the governor's house and hold him hostage. As Colonel Antigua enters the private property and asks the 4 horsemen to release the governor, Enforcer demands that he be given 100,000 gold in 24 hours in exchange for the governor. The news reaches Captain Montesero as he is told to bring the 25,000 gold from his treasury to rescue the governor. The same has been asked of other captains from other towns. However, with a meagre amount left in the treasury, Montesero decides to collect taxes early and from the wealthiest people. He forcibly takes the rich people's jewels and gold. Diego, Isabella, and Alejandro realize soon it will be their turn. Alejandro notes that although he could have used his gold for better things, it's his duty to help free the governor. Diego decides to visit Santa Barbara and find out what's going on. At first, he watches how the first shipment of gold arrives and is taken inside by the cloaked horsemen. Zorro sneaks into the estate, but he soon encounters the Enforcer, who is now returned with more advanced mechanisms in his cybernetic arm. As the Enforcer tries to kill Zorro, he manages to escape. The title of the episode seems like an opportunity missed. The plot feels basic and has nothing to do with the biblical 4 horsemen. If anything, The episode features some of the best action sequences. Zorro realizes he must find another way to sneak in, and so he confronts Captain Montesero's garrison. After setting the beehive upon them, Zorro runs away with the car, but then hides inside one of the gold crates so that he can directly enter the governor's abode. He sends a straw doll of himself riding Tornado to dupe the garrison. On the other hand, the enforcer refuses to let go of the governor. Once inside, Zorro subdues one of the horsemen and hides himself with his cloak. He then pretends to follow the enforcer's orders and takes away the governor. Zorro helps the governor dress up as Zorro, which enables him to escape, but the governor collides with Montesero's garrison. Montesero refuses to believe he is the governor and rebukes him until he takes off the governor's mask. The governor gets mad at Montesero for the humiliation and orders Colonel Antigua to capture the kidnappers. The enforcer orders his men to fend off the soldiers as he goes to escape with all the loot alone. However, Zorro has already infiltrated his men and secretly follows Enforcer. As Enforcer attempts to escape with all the gold, Zorro gets on the flying cart that Enforcer has attached to a gas balloon. Meanwhile, Captain Montesero also follows the balloon, hoping to catch the Enforcer and save his career after humiliating the governor. Finally, Zorro and Enforcer engage in an epic battle atop the cart, which almost collides with a mountain. Zorro manages to take away Enforcer's cybernetic arm, and after shoving him into the garrison, Zorro escapes. The Nightmare Express. The episode begins with Don Felipe's railway project being sabotaged by an unknown figure. Zorro tries to stop the culprit, but he is thrown off the cliff, and there is a blast anyway. Unfortunately, Zorro gets the blame for the sabotage. Don Felipe angrily visits Captain Montesero to complain and seeks security for his project. Montesero is more than happy to lend his best men, or should we say worst men, to the garrison as the security detail. Don Diego de la Vega is also one of the men involved in the railway project as he provides the geological expertise, while Don Alejandro, Igancio and others have invested in it to make the project a success. However, Don Felipe still remains worried as he trusts neither Zorro nor Montesero. The saboteur is revealed to be a certain Mr. Rodolfo. As usual, he wants revenge against Don Felipe for firing him after his accident. The accident has left Rodolfo crippled, and now he is another steampunk villain, sustaining himself with gadgets. Taking revenge on the old boss appears to be the most overused plot device in the series, but who can blame him? Apparently, Felipe had sent Rodolfo to herd sheep instead, which can be humiliating for a man of science. With the garrison guards sleeping on the job, Zorro arrives for a nightly patrol at the location he encounters Mr. Rodolfo, as well as the garrison guards. Zorro overcomes them and looks for Rodolfo, who again escapes, setting a machine to explode. Don Felipe tries to stop Zorro again, misunderstanding him. Zorro escapes as the captain and the garrison arrive. Montesero refuses to take any responsibility and even asks Felipe to stop work until Zorro is caught. Back at the hideout, Zorro shows Isabella and Bernardo a large red key that Rodolfo used. Bernardo recognizes it as something made in the south. Bernardo meets an old friend who tells him that such keys are made only at the railways and in the south. Diego immediately leaves to investigate and arrives at Rodolfo's warehouse, where he finds Rodolfo and his assistant preparing gunpowder. With no time to waste, he decides to follow them as Diego. Meanwhile, Don Felipe inaugurates the new railway tracks. Diego notices Rodolfo and Armando setting up 150 kilograms of gunpowder to blow up the support. Holding a railway bridge, Diego tries to get away and inform Felipe, but he is caught by the criminals. They tie him to a support and set up the gunpowder to blast. Diego is able to save himself, but the explosion breaks the bridge. Diego leaves to inform the others, but he might be too late as everyone boards the new train. And by everyone, I mean the wealthy and influential. Rodolfo also disguises himself and insists on boarding the train, and Montesero asks Felipe to let him in. Diego follows the tracks to go after the train. However, he is noticed by Garcia and the garrison. As they try to stop him, Rodolfo sneaks out to tie up the loco pilots and damage the brakes. Zorro gets on the engine, but Rodolfo escapes into the compartments. As Zorro finds out that there is no way to stop the train, he goes on to find another way to stop it. Rodolfo confronts Don Felipe, and as both the garrison and Zorro arrive, Rodolfo jumps out of the train. Bernardo and Isabella also sneak into another compartment to find a way. Zorro fends off the garrison and meets with his friends. Together, they blow up a track on the plains, forcing the train to stop. It stops right before a cliff, and the day is saved. Rodolfo's mechanical legs are also damaged, which causes an accident. As Armando gets caught, Rodolfo limps away in secret. The ice monster cometh. Winter is here in El Pueblo, and it's snowing everywhere. Don Alejandro and Zorro play a prank on Isabella by scaring her with the story of a large snow bear called Osa Blanca. Bernardo joins in as he turns up dressed as Osa Blanca. Grey Owl and her grandson, Little Squirrel, also find themselves freezing in the cold winter, and Little Squirrel volunteers to go out and fetch some wood. As he ventures out, he comes across Osa Blanca. Little Squirrel realizes that no one will believe him, and so he must show it to everyone. However, he gets kidnapped by Osa Blanca, which actually turns out to be a burly man called Joaquin and a group of men mining for gold. Joaquin makes Little Squirrel go through a hole and find the vein for the gold reserve. However, what Little Squirrel finds instead is an assembly of bones. The men fear it's Osa Blanca's doing, and as the storm intensifies while the earth quakes, some of the men run away in fear of Osa Blanca. As Zorro and Isabella look for Little Squirrel, Zorro comes across Joaquin and the large man attacks Zorro. He leaves Zorro unconscious as he falls through the snow, but Grey Owl takes the form of a bear and saves him. Zorro follows Joaquin's footprints, while Joaquin returns to the cave after missing the deserters. He again sends the kid through another hole, and this time, Little Squirrel finds the vein of gold, but also a white bear cub that mesmerizes him. As Little Squirrel comes up with the news, Joaquin decides to blow up the hole. Little Squirrel tries to stop them and runs through the hole to find the cub. Zorro and Grey Owl find Bernardo and Isabella on their way and head towards the mine. As they approach the mountain, the explosives go off, causing tremors, and Zorro has to save everyone from the avalanche. This is the second story that does not feature Captain Montesero, and that's quite a respite. Considering Montesero is the main villain of the series, he is rather oversold, as he is the least formidable one. Of course, Joaquin is not your regular villain, as he is just a greedy fellow without morals. Inside the cave, Little Squirrel encounters the mama bear Osa Blanca, but before it could attack, the avalanche knocks him out. The mama bear digs out the cub and Little Squirrel. She doesn't harm the boy, and the three hide as they hear the voices of the greedy miners. As the miners again try to blow up the cave, the bear protests, but fire surrounds her. Zorro and the team arrive at the point, and Zorro protects the bear from another explosion. There is a cave-in, and although the humans are able to escape, the bears get trapped. Joaquin leaves after promising to return. Little Squirrel returns dejectedly, but finds that the bears have survived. The secret of El Zorro. Don Alejandro gets stung by a snake while gardening, which prompts Diego to tell him his secret. Well, of course, he asks Bernardo to call the doctor, but his timing is questionable. Anyway, so one day when Diego was 14 years old, he went to play hide and seek with Isabella and found a hidden cave. There, he found the medallion with a Z. Diego keeps the information hidden and comes out 20 minutes later. The kids then witness a bunch of hooligans trying to net a grizzly bear. Diego and Isabella make fake noises to scare away the hooligans and save the bear. The bear approaches Diego and transforms into Grey Owl. She notices the medallion and anoints Diego as El Zorro, the fox, who is meant to do great things. As this story finishes, Bernardo returns with Dr. Navarra. However, as a gust of wind topples a bottle of serum from Paris that could cure poisoning, Dr. Navarra apologizes and leaves to bring the other bottle from the garrison storage, while Diego embarks on another tale. Alejandro's fever also worsens, and there's a 50-50 chance that he won't be able to recall the day. Diego's story now covers his university days, when he learns fencing and science. Diego returns to California with 3 horses, but one is extremely wild. It runs away as soon as it anchors in California. Diego claims that his father's letters encouraged him to do something for the people, and so he gifted his friends with materials that will help improve El Pueblo. However, when Captain Montesero unjustly confiscates them, Diego complains. Montesero shows that he doesn't care, and his subordinates turn out to be the hooligans who once tried to catch the bear. Once again, Grey Owl saves Diego from the hooligans and inspires him to be Zorro. Diego uses the hidden cave as his hideout and involves Bernardo in his plans. Diego even tames the wild black horse and names him Tornado. As Diego finishes telling how he became Zorro, the doctor returns with bad news. He informs that all the samples of the serum have finished, and without the medication, Alejandro might not survive the night. Diego makes an excuse to leave and dresses up as Zorro as he approaches Grey Owl for help. She brews a medicine to help Alejandro, and Diego returns with it. After feeding the medication to his sick father, Diego continues the story of his first mission, which was to stop Captain Montesero from delivering the looted supplies to the crown. He introduces himself as Zorro, defeats Montesero in a one-to-one duel, and leaves with the loot, impressing the people. As his story finishes, Alejandro wakes up, now recovered. He claims to have a dream that Diego is Zorro, but Diego doesn't acknowledge it and hugs his papa. The Nordic Quest. A man of Viking origins arrives in the town and is on the hunt for a gold medallion. Zorro wears a gold medallion. Is he talking about the same one? The Viking crashes a party and strangles innocent men randomly to inquire about the gold medallion. Everyone is obviously scared. And can the lanky, lean, moustached Zorro be a match to the 8-foot-tall bag of saw-coloured hair? The people decide to report to Captain Montesero, but it's Sergeant Garcia who has the first contact with the ginormous man. The Viking breaks Garcia's sword, and the cowardly man points him towards Zorro. Luckily, both Isabella and Zorro have witnessed the encounter. The next day, as the Viking causes some trouble, Zorro voluntarily meets him. At first, the fight goes sideways for the much lighter Zorro, but that also means he is more flexible, so the bendy Zorro manages to subdue the man and send him packing on a ship. However, on the way back home, Zorro encounters the Viking. Much to his shock and horror, Zorro is defeated, and the man snatches the medallion from his neck. The man returns to a shabby house and attempts to destroy it when his twin enters the room. The two brothers fight, but as one wins, he leaves with the golden medallion to find Thor's treasure and rule the Viking world. Meanwhile, Diego, Isabella, and Bernardo brush up on their Nordic mythology. Diego notes, the man belongs to the Viking tribe of Scandinavians who believe in the legend of Thor, and that his hammer, gloves, and belt constitute the treasures that give the wearer almighty strength. They also learn that the medallion Zorro used to wear is one of the 5 medallions, which, when together, will direct a person to where the treasure is buried. Likewise, the evil twin uses the medallion on a map, which directs him to the seabed near the port. Bernardo helps Diego prepare to take on the Viking, and he leaves for the mission. But on his way, Zorro again meets the Viking man and proceeds to attack him. However, this is not the evil twin, as the Viking finally introduces himself as Ben Eriksson, who has always fought with his brother, Bronn, for the medallion. The Eriksson twins are made to look like the mighty Thor for a reason. As Ben confirms the legend, he shows Zorro the map, and Zorro draws the medallion's emblem on it. The map points them in the same direction, and the duo arrives at the port. They secretly follow Born. As he dives underwater and finds a sunken Viking ship, Born finds the treasure chest, but Zorro and Ben intervene. Born escapes with the hammer and belt, while Zorro gets the gloves. On the shore, Captain Montesero, Sergeant Garcia, and the garrison try to stop him, but Thor's equipment gives him immense power to defeat them with one swift blow, and the garrison tries to flee. Zorro and Ben arrive at the port, and Zorro, with his super-powered gloves, boosts the new weapon that Bernardo made for him. Using the weapon, Zorro defeats Born and takes away his hammer and belt. Zorro flings all 3 items back into the ocean, whereas Ben returns him the medallion before leaving with his brother. Adios, mi capitan. This is the final episode of the series. Captain Montesero has built a dam that feeds water only to the rich farmer, while the poor get poorer. Montesero means to collect more taxes from the rich farmers and deliver them to the governor. However, Zorro would not have it, and he breaks the dam with explosives. With his project having failed, Montezero is already in a sour mood when an emissary of the governor, a certain Lieutenant Cordova, arrives. The governor's message states that Cordova will now be in charge of building the dam and catching Zorro. Montezero reluctantly agrees to give his garrison to Cordova, but secretly plans to sabotage Cordova. A few days later, Diego and Isabella observe that the new dam is better than the old one, but there is something unnaturally familiar. They meet Cordova, and Diego asks him about the cylindrical structures, which Cordova avoids answering. Meanwhile, thanks to Sergeant Garcia's clumsiness, the plan to sabotage and blame it on Zorro backfires on Garcia and Montezero. However, there is a third figure in the shadows who has something against Montezero and Zorro. As it turns out, none of Cordova's plans and equipment is his own, as he gets them from the bushes, where someone leaves them. Cordova makes several attempts to capture Zorro, each time using new inventions, which makes both Zorro and Montezero suspicious. As Montezero investigates, he finds Zorro looking for the same clues. Before we move on, there's something that we forgot to mention. It is the theme music composed by Dennis C. Brown and Maxine Sellers. It not only caught the fancy of the English-speaking audience, but also of the Spanish-speaking ones. Now, back to our story. Montezero tries to capture Zorro, but is still unsuccessful. The man behind Cordova's plans turns out to be Lieutenant Montecruz, aka the Professor, who wants revenge again and has escaped prison with the help of the weapons hidden in his state-of-the-art wheelchair. Meanwhile, Cordova finishes building the dam, and now his secret plan is in motion. He brings in metal helmets with headlights to catch Zorro. However, Zorro has studied the machine's designs and realized it's the Professor's handiwork. He goes prepared, wearing metal armor. Cordova, Montezero, and the garrison attack Zorro, but to no avail, and at last, all of them get trapped in the dam. The Professor opens the floodgate, drowning the garrison and Zorro, but he has come prepared. Bernardo throws him an inflatable boat that he climbs. Zorro also manages to board the Professor's boat and disarms him, as well as destroying his chair. With Cordova's utter failure, Montezero is happy to secure his chair as he waits to catch Zorro another day. Marvelous verdict. This tale of Zorro might be short, but it succeeded in catching the essence of the masked crusader, while adding something more to it. Zorro is very much like Batman from the West, but without the emotional baggage. However, despite its good storytelling and animation, the series is very average, which may be why it has gone to obscurity.